When most species make it to the wider galactic stage beyond their home system, it tends to be with one of two mindsets. Be it overt or underlying idea, benevolent or malevolent, excited or anxious, it always boils down to one of two thoughts. We're completely prepared for this. That's the first thing most people think. Here we are, undoubtedly the most developed, civilized, and enlightened species to emerge from the cosmos chaos, having survived everything the universe could throw at us. Our will can turn mountains to sand. Our perseverance transforms saltwater oceans into near-endless wells from which we can sip at our leisure. Our brilliant minds enabled us to escape our homeworld, expand to every other celestial body near us, and travel faster than the speed of light. Tens of thousands of times across tens of thousands of worlds, most species have some variation of this same thought. The second line of thought is as follows: we're not sure if we're fully prepared for this, but we have to go anyway. The reasons for this one actually vary a fair bit. It could be something as simple as poor early decisions made it, so that the species needs to leave for reasons like, hey, does the air taste like ammonia to anyone else? Or, oops, accidentally detonated a volcanic ley line, and between the near-constant earthquakes, flooding, and the upcoming volcanic winter, we think it's time to leave and hopefully try again elsewhere and get it right next time. Or they could just be so cripplingly lonely in the area of space that they're in and just want some more friends. Sure, those aren't the best, nicest, or grandest reasons for going into space, and it'll take a lot of work and flowery verbiage to make them look good in a history lesson or datapad. However, there are many species that had similar sentiments and did not get that next time. But those are the two general sentiments that most species have when they reach the wider galaxy. Only one of them is ashamed when they come across an older race of what appears to be a mass of tentacles in the ship equivalent of a bowl of water that nonchalantly deflects and dismantles 1,000 years of advanced weaponry. The other politely says hello, and, if they're feeling brave, asks for directions to a nice place to stay before saying goodbye and leaving as quickly as their FTL drives allow them. At least until they feel more comfortable and join a galactic community like the Galactic Aligned Council or the Superior Union. On the other hand, the wider galaxy tends to have 4 regular reactions to a new species. On the other hand, the wider galaxy tends to have 4 regular reactions to a new species. They freak out. They ignore them, they exploit them ruthlessly, or they get uncomfortably interested in you. And if you have to pick one, you want the second one. You're undoubtedly wondering, why? Sure, the first and third seem bad, but the fourth seems passable. Why wouldn't you want to attract the super-advanced space squid's attention? Simple. It's because any of those squids can range from strange to psychotic. And every spacefaring species is naturally selfish. They must be, if their multi-planetary spacefaring empire is to survive. Now, if you wouldn't mind bringing your attention to the aforementioned mass of tentacles, aka the Shaltan, back to your attention for a quick explanation. It is not uncommon for many aliens to encounter the Shaltan as the first new race they encounter. They've been building and sending out exploratory and research spacecraft left and right since they got to space to broaden their knowledge in all scientific fields. This would be fine if they didn't periodically hack open both people and ships when they were still both alive and functioning. They tend to get away with this because of bureaucratic loopholes within the GAC and by following all the rest of the rules precisely as they're written. The specific rules on piracy state that piracy is any acts or actions made with the purpose or intent to harm, steal, or coerce items, credits, ships, or personnel directly owned or employed by said persons, the Galactic Aligned Council, its constituent members, or any sanctioned governing bodies under the GAC, while in GAC or constitute member space. The Shaltan understood what piracy was, so when the first incidents occurred, they punished and chastised the majority of the crew. They then penalized and stripped the captain of his post, barring him from regaining it, tore apart the ship as a gesture of goodwill towards the species they wronged, and imprisoned the maintenance personnel and scientists who ripped open the ships and people, respectively. Then they got caught doing it to species before they entered the GAC. They didn't get caught immediately. Took a good millennia or so until the major incident occurred. A pirate ship had been caught with a very aromatic but undamaged small colony ship with around 2,000 passengers, a manifest saying there were about 5 times that number, and a charter for 5 research facilities. 4 had been visited without distress or warning signals being sent out. Now the heated legal and moral argument could go on for hours, but boils down to this. The galaxy as a whole had some very choice words with them, most ending just short of war declarations. But their galactic PR teams were able to quickly and efficiently prove that there was no solid evidence of them interacting with any pirates or pre-FTL species. It wasn't their fault that the pirate ships happened to be from the lost and stolen Shaltan exploratory fleets, which they'll assure you that they were looking for. And it's not like the stations had any data or corpses to prove that they had done experimentation on any member or non-member species. Many believe that if many of their most vocal critics had died suddenly from a variety of frighteningly effective viruses and diseases, they'd have had a lot more explaining to do. Shaltan space has since become, and continues to be, one of the most heavily patrolled sections of space, and they have been barred from practically all first contact and most diplomacy missions. Until the galactic community was reminded that they possessed some of the best long-range and medical scanners, as well as a significant percentage of the GAC's medical information. This situation, and its apparent lack of consequences, is a glaring example of how the GAC treats its members and is a cornerstone of how you'll be treated. If you've been with them for a long time, you have something rare, or made a noteworthy discovery, then you can get away with basically anything within reason. Do anything else, and it'll feel like they're being unreasonably punished, as if to make up for the species they were lax on, which made encountering humans one of the most unusual things that's ever happened in DGAC's history. Even the events that led to the meeting were strange. A group of Shaltan explorers were being attacked after a, quote, misinformed GAC patrol fleet fired upon them after failing to provide their ship's identification codes. That began the long and exhausting pursuit which led them into the Sol system. At which point, both vessels were met with 3 small and unassuming crafts working under the banner of the Terran Unified Front, and were told to stand down, identify themselves, or be fired upon. There are dozens of reasons why what happened next happened the way it did, according to hundreds of council members and influential people. Some blame insufficient instruction from a member of some such race, others mistranslations from the ship's pseudo-AI, and still others the exasperation of the Mhino captain who didn't want to deal with the galactic equivalent of children with a firearm. The Shaltan's ship was fortunately too heavily damaged from the chase to the sector to do much more than immediately tell them that information. Watch the minnow ships shoot their shots, and say a prayer for the people on those ships. They then stood in shock as the Terran spacecraft casually deflected the shot, cautioned the Shultan to max out their shield's power, and charged their weapons. Even after they heeded the Terran's warning, the fireworks display left lasting damage on the Shultan ship and some of the most warped scrap the GAC had ever seen. And, for whatever reason, no one involved in the episode is ready to talk about it. And whatever the explorers reported to the Shultan administration, it promptly had them sign non-aggression treaties. That apparently was one of the most nerve-wracking and frustrating treaties that most of the diplomats had ever participated in. One even stated that they would rather pull off every suction cup on his body than ever see a human lawyer again. After the squids had cleaned up and calmed down enough to speak with the human representatives, they invited them aboard their ship to ask them two questions. Why did they have such an aggressive response, even with a confirmed non-combat vessel? And why is a species that's strong still inside their home system? They had anticipated a single simple explanation, such as them being an old isolationist species with superior technology, such as the XPI, and then being ordered to keep out of their space and sent on their way. And they were correct in their isolationist assumption. But it's the paranoid form of isolationism rather than the old and tired of people type. To answer the first question, the humans were unsure if there were any hidden weapons or explosives on board their ship. That was an understandable, albeit paranoid, reaction. They were startled to discover that they were a new species, and to learn that the Terran Unified Front had designated at least 4 other ships bearing GAC-C insignias as either undesirable or overtly hostile due to genocidal attempts on everything in the system. Obviously, this was a severe accusation leveled against the GAC. It also had them doubt the absurd claim that a young primitive species could survive even one attempt at extermination by a larger, more technologically advanced civilization. When they heard this, they demanded clarification and proof. The Terrans then informed that for the last 625 cycles, about 10,500 Earth years, both the Galactic Aligned Council and a presumably unaffiliated race had launched attacks on the species, planet, and local system. The very first occurred prior to FTL, or in the late industrial era. It was a violent 3-week assault when their visitors abruptly fled the planet, leaving some of their soldiers and a significant amount of incredibly advanced equipment with them. A few thousand or more visitors were left on their planet and either refuse to leave or don't know how to leave. The humans had a long debate on what to do with the residents and ultimately decided to tenuously accept them, at first in quarantined-off areas, then into the general public after enough time passed. That's how it was until even the youngest of them passed 5275 cycles ago, or 211 years ago, from natural processes. After the Shultan was released from the custody of the Terran Unified Fronts and repairs were made to the ship, they investigated the validity of these accusations. They uncovered that during the invasion, a few different members of the GAC planned on capitalizing on the confusion or swooping in and pushing back their visitors. Then those visitors make a messy, hasty, and costly retreat from small, stubborn, angry monkeys on a tectonically unstable, irradiated ball of dirt. At least from their perspective. That scared many of the ones watching enough to try to get a handle on the situation. The first attempt to get rid of humanity was to destabilize the planet's tectonic plates, causing massive floods, reawakening inactive volcanoes, and more than a couple storms. They weren't aware that the humans didn't even think that they were being attacked. The second part of the attack includes a series of genetic attacks via viruses against the genetic structure of flora, fauna, and the human species itself. It initially went poorly due to the natural resistance of most of the natural wildlife and many of the native viruses overpowering and killing the lab-grown ones. But eventually, they cultivated a couple of strains that worked on the inhabitants and that weren't overpowered by other viruses. It wildly mutated the fauna and flora to be as lethal as possible and increased their general intelligence. The plan was to supposedly wipe the land clean of any hints of culture and discover the ruins later. Humanity reacted by reinforcing cities and retreating into apocalyptic bunkers on whatever terrain was stable enough to live on, and even on some that wasn't. Then they collected anything they could that wasn't too mutated, anything interesting that was from those ecological disasters, and killed anything too hostile until most of the animals stopped trying to actively kill them, or decided they wanted to talk instead. Not long before the planet's third extraterrestrial encounter, a couple of those species obtained acknowledged sovereignty over specific territories and citizen status. One of the GXC few psychic species appears to have carried out both subtle and overt psionic attacks that separated the planet's major species into three global factions while amplifying humanity's worst instincts. This was the most shocking revelation for the Shaltan, as developing psionics was a rare trait shared by only 10.5 of the GAC members, most of which, at that time, had been preparing for some kind of upcoming catastrophe for hundreds of cycles. After this discussion, they performed some further probing and discovered that the organizations responsible for the attack was an ancient GAC member species known as the Illuminated. According to what was said, the strategy was to overwhelm their primitive brains with massive amounts of psychic energy, and it was partially successful. Billions of people died as a result of the mental strain of having hundreds of thoughts racing through their heads in a thousandth of a second, or simply not being genetically predisposed to handle a large amount of psychic energy. This direct attack on their race drew the attention of humanity and confirmed that the recent strangeness was not totally natural. It also led to the discovery that a significant number of humans on the world possessed some level of psychic ability, as is characteristic of many psychics, while the strength and application of their skills vary greatly. There were two seemingly universal, subconscious abilities that were shared by most of their race. These skills include the ability to detect when they are being observed, even when they are unaware of the location of the observers, and the power to artificially dilate their perception of time with psychic energy. The existence of psychics was a minor piece of critical knowledge that the Illuminated overlooked, because all psychic creatures require an influx of psionic energy in order to grow their capacity and consciously use their skills. Unless they have so much potential that it subconsciously manifests, and they just drowned the entire planet with psionic power. A planet full of unawakened psychic people that were strong enough to subconsciously use their abilities for generations. There isn't an exact number of people who died when mankind was attacked, but billions died, and a significant proportion of those gave out unique psychic death wails, which then affected the world's other dying psychics, triggering an exponential domino effect. accumulating and building until the last of the casualties let out their wails all over the planet and into deep space. And the timing of those wails corresponded with the disaster that nearly every psychic species was freaking out about. The ripples of that attack killed untold billions, including those who had put up psychic defenses ahead of time. And the illuminated, who had either destroyed or disabled most physic defenses, had to max out their psychic amplifiers while also being the subconscious targets of these death whales. Went from a respected multi-planetary partner species to a near-extinct protectorate one. An attack on their home system was the most recent and least impactful interaction, at least to them. A massive space battle which led to the destruction of a local dwarf planet and the creation of a graveyard hidden in the rings of one of the local gas giants. That raised a few red flags among the impromptu Shaltan ambassadors. They then attempted to learn more about how they were able to resist another spacefaring army using just the resources of their home systems and a couple centuries of space combat experience, all while limiting the majority of the damage to 2 planets. The humans responded by reminding them that they technically have the Gaki ship under arrest for trespassing and reminded them of what they did no less than an hour ago to the other intruders. After a thorough search of the ship, the crew was then given a choice. Either they would have their ship repaired, released, and banned from coming back to Terran space, or they could stay for as long as they'd like and partake in a more in-depth information exchange. Now, given that this offer was made to explorers from a species that had every reason to stay in isolation, it was impressive that they had the wherewithal to ask them why. And they were told it was mainly for 5 reasons. They felt that their home system was getting a bit cramped. They could do with a bit more legroom, and they would rather not have to fight over random planets and resources they have, but can't use. And the second reason was that a large portion of their population wanted to explore more of the universe and hopefully clear up a lot of the anti-alien sentiments that were floating around. The third was the fact that if they stayed where they were, they wouldn't be able to properly adapt and deal with changes that were happening in the universe. The fourth explanation they provided was straightforward. They desired to expand more, both in terms of species and civilization. And last, they believed it was necessary. They weren't sure if they were prepared, but they couldn't wait for the universe to try to take them out. Of course, from attempting to take them out for the 5th time, they concluded their discussions with some age-old human wisdom. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And based on everything they've been through and how they're doing now, the universe seems to agree.